Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another Tomes of Terror book review. So, the British author Alan Golbourn, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right after all this time, he'll be no stranger to regular viewers of this channel, this little series here, because I previously reviewed two of his other novels. One of them was called The 666 Murders, that came out in 2022, and its 2023 follow-up, The Cult from Beyond. So Alan recently contacted me again and asked if I would have a look at his latest novel, which is his fourth one, and this is a vampire tale called The Last Breath Before Death. Since you're watching this video, you can obviously see that I accepted his generous offer. Now, unlike his two earlier books that I reviewed, they both featured the private investigator Randolph Landon and were set in 1966 and 1970, respectively. This one's an entirely new story. It's set in the modern day, and we're following like a younger, kind of paranormal focused journalist and comic book illustrator whose name is Jimmy Cochran. Now I'm going to say that as a main character, I didn't like Jimmy as a character quite as much as I liked Randolph. Like I liked his kind of world weary, kind of older taking no shit kind of thing. Like, I don't know, he was a slightly more appealing character. Jimmy, who is a bit younger, he comes across a little bit like a kind of smarmy and kind of full of himself. Though I will admit that his genuine, undying love for his little Sphinx cat, whose name is Coulson, which I thought was adorable, that did go a long way toward endearing him to me more because, you know, you guys all know I love cats and I love a cat dad. Like the other two novels, though, this one also has like an investigation into two missing people, in this case, that descends into supernatural territory, specifically vampires, as I mentioned earlier, though these ones are kind of a more folkloric sort of vampires than your kind of run-of-the-mill modern vampire. So, you know, that was a point in its favor. Of the three books of his that I've read thus far, I still also have, he sent me his first novel, which I believe is Werewolves. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't got around to that one yet because that one's like quite long, but I will eventually review that one as well. I had totally forgotten that I had it, and then I was like, oh yeah, I need to read that one too. I have like a huge list, but yeah. So of the three of his that I've read so far, I think I generally like this one the best, even though you guys know I'm not like the biggest fan of vampire media, but I really did like the angle on vampires that was, portrayed in this one. I did have a few issues with this novel, some of which I mentioned in reviews of his other work, one of which I'll kind of elaborate on a little bit later. But overall, I found this like a really, really good, like compelling read, had a cool backstory behind the villains. Like I said, they're vampires, but they kind of have a little different folklore cult thing going on, which I kind of liked. And this kind of mystery that sort of his books tend to like jump from country to country, and this one did too. This one actually had scenes taking place in 3 different countries. So our main character, Jimmy, he's originally from Shropshire, England, but has been living in New York City for quite a while. I don't remember exactly how long or if they even said. He's actually a very successful comic book illustrator, as I mentioned earlier, and he does a comic called The Gun from Montana, which is like a Western kind of thing, with his friend and collaborator named Donovan, who is kind of just like a minor character. He also has a sideline gig as a freelance writer, and he's mainly known for like investigating haunted houses, like in just hauntings in general, and writing about his experiences, like for various publications. He's very skeptical by nature, but has seen some paranormal phenomena for himself, so he knows that at least some of it is legit. Now, he lives in a very decent apartment in the city, which the way it was described, it's not hugely described, but I was just like, wow, that'll probably be like $5,000 a month or whatever. Yeah, but, it's a nice apartment. But like I said, he's very successful. And he's actually quite happily single. So he lives alone with his beloved kitty, Coulson, who, like I said earlier, he occasionally goes on Tinder and has some casual hookups, some of which are kind of described. His latest fuck buddy is named Sophia, who is a beautiful tattoo artist with a super high sex drive who's into light BDSM. But so there's a couple scenes of that in there too. It's not like, super porny or anything like that, but there are like a couple scenes of that. But he is very reluctant to get tied down to any one person. So all that is kind of neither here nor there. Near the beginning of the story, his mom calls from England and tells him that his half-brother, Quentin, and Quentin's best friend, whose name is Riley, have apparently gone missing. They told their family and friends that they were going on this week-long hiking trip to Germany, but it's now been 2 weeks and nobody has heard from them. So Mom, whose name is Lillian, is understandably concerned about the situation. Now Jimmy is bummed out that his mom is concerned, but he's honestly not that upset about the whole missing person thing. Him and his half brother are estranged. What happened was they had like this argument over Jimmy being unable to fly over to Quentin's wedding, and they haven't spoken in years. Like Jimmy apologized for not going to the wedding, and he actually had like a really good, like, health reasons and stuff like that why he couldn't go. But his brother apparently wasn't having it and said, well, you should have just toughed it out and come to the wedding and blah blah. And so they haven't really been speaking since then. Now, Jimmy figures, since he apologized, and he says, hey, if Quentin wanted to mend fences with me, he could have called and patched things up at any time, but he never did that. So Jimmy basically adopted a, well, fuck him then kind of attitude. Over the next few days, though, after his mom's phone call, he finds himself kind of thinking about Quentin more and more, even though he's literally not given the dude like a moment's consideration, like up to now, you know what I mean? Now, to take his mind off things, he decides to make another trip out to this supposedly haunted house on Staten Island, which is owned by a family called the Holbrooks, and he's been working on an article about this house and is actually kind of broken into it, like to spend the night there and see if anything happened, because the family fled, you know what I mean? It was like an Amityville situation. So he kind of breaks in there on the down low to see if anything happened, and nothing did, but he decides to kind of go back out there and see what he can see. Now, while he's there, he runs into a man named Walter, who is a psychic medium who's actually been assisting the Holbrook family with their haunting. Now, Jimmy had actually investigated Walter in the course of his research into all the supposed paranormal activity going on in this house, but he doesn't tell Walter this, and he suspects that the psychic is probably a fake and maybe doing what the lawyer in the Amityville situation did, where they were kind of like faking the haunting for attention or for publicity or whatever. But as the two guys are talking, Walter comes up with the name Quentin, unprompted, and says that he knows Jimmy is worried about him. Now, Jimmy is still skeptical. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but he starts to have an inkling that maybe Walter is a real psychic after all. So they have kind of a nice chat. Walter's a very nice man. And so Walter actually gives Jimmy his card and says, hey, if you want to come see me for a reading, about your brother, then, you can just come. My door is open. So Jimmy then has this strange dream about his brother. And he's like, it seemed kind of random, but he was remembering this accident that Quentin had when they were younger. Like, Quentin is actually 10 years older than he is, I think. So Jimmy, he's kind of like, he's like, man, I'm just thinking about him, and I just have this feeling that, like, something bad happened to him. So Jimmy decides to bite the bullet and go visit the psychic, Walter, and see if he can come up with any information about where his brother might be, because he's still missing, Now, at the reading, Walter has a horrifying vision, which he's never had before. And the thing about it, though, is that it's kind of too vague, like, to make out any specific details. What he is able to determine, however, is that he's absolutely certain that Quentin and Riley are still alive, but are in horrible, horrible danger from some kind of unidentified evil, which he's not entirely sure what it is. So Jimmy decides to fly to England to see his mom and kind of support her through the investigation into the brother's disappearance. So he leaves the kitty, because I was like, well, don't just leave the kitty all by himself, you know what I mean? Because this is the kind of shit I think about when I'm reading these books. Because I'm thinking if it was me, I'm just like, I can't leave my kitties anywhere. But he actually leaves him with his friend Donovan, who takes good care of it. Nothing happens to the kitty, so it's fine, because I was like kind of worried. But yeah, so nothing happens to the kitty. So he leaves the kitty with his friend, and he jets off and ends up staying with his mom at Quentin's house. And they kind of try to coordinate with law enforcement in northern Germany, which is where the two guys disappeared. So things seem to be at kind of like a frustrating standstill. And neither Quentin nor Riley told anyone specifically where they were going. They didn't seem to have like a super plan or anything like that, which is why they didn't tell anybody. And although the German police are looking for them, they don't really have much information to go on. Now, at Quentin's house, Jimmy finds a diary with page torn out, and he does the old rubbing a pencil on the next page thing. And he finds out that the page was mostly just this mundane list of like shit to do before the trip. Like, we need to buy this and we need to remember to do this and blah, blah, blah. But one of the items on the list specifies meeting someone named Detlef in a town called Salzwedel, I guess is how you pronounce it. So this clue is actually passed on to the authorities. Not too long after arriving in England, though, Jimmy gets this very mysterious phone call at Quentin's house from a man who knows who he is and knows that his brother is missing and knows who his brother is. Now, Jimmy agrees to meet with this man alone, but in a public place. And the dude is a little weird. He's very pale and thin, clad in all black, all that kind of stuff. So the man actually never gives his name. And he tells Jimmy about this Serbian vampire cult, or he starts to tell him about that. But Jimmy is just like really pissed off and annoyed, and he's like, "Look, I just want to know where my brother is. Why did you call me? Why am I here? Why are you wasting my time? Blah, blah, blah." Like, because he's kind of cranky like that. I mean, understandably, I guess. So now the man has to actually leave suddenly. He's kept seemingly paranoid that someone is watching them. But he actually meets up with Jimmy the next day and spins him this really long yarn about the last remnants of a clan of vampires who are apparently still operating in Germany and may have had something to do with Quentin and Riley disappearing. So after this point, since the police investigation seems to be going nowhere, Jimmy decides to travel to Germany himself to try and find his brother. So as I mentioned, like on the whole, this is a really entertaining, like quite gripping read. I think the mystery unspooled at like a really good steady pace, kept me engaged like the whole way through. Even though, like I said, I'm not super into vampires, but I did like the more folklore and cult-based aspect of the monsters here, which kind of recalled the old European legends in a way that's more appealing to me than I guess like a lot of modern vampire novels are. Some of the issues that I mentioned with Alan Golbourn's other books, such as he has a tendency to do like really overly expositional dialogue, which is something that's kind of part of his style, I guess. And some of it's a little bit clunky and it doesn't sound all that much the way real people talk. You can tell that it's just, imparting information rather than just doing it in a more organic way. And villains kind of over explaining their motives, like they did that too. I mean, Jimmy at one point does tell one of the baddies that he sounds like a Bond villain. So, because I was thinking the same thing, and I was like, okay, well, so he's like a little bit self-aware that that's what's going on. But I do feel like the expositional dialogue, while still quite prevalent, is not as prevalent as it was in the other two books of his that I read. Now, one thing that bothered me though, and which I don't remember encountering in the two previous books of his, was kind of a handful of the spoken asides or thoughts that Jimmy had. As I said before, like Jimmy came across as slightly arrogant to me, though not so overtly that it like turned me off his character entirely, because he did have, like I said, he had some endearing qualities, like particularly of a revolving red his cat. But there were a few instances in here where he would just say or think some kind of sideways shit that didn't really have anything to do with the story at hand, and just it almost came across as maybe like the author trying to insert his own opinions randomly. I could be wrong about that. Like, for example, I'll give you a couple examples of this that kind of stood out to me. So one time, like, Jimmy is, kind of idly swiping through Tinder early in the story, and he suddenly goes off on this weird mini rant, like in his head, he's thinking about women with ridiculous standards who don't look like their pictures, or they use all these filters on their pictures, but then they expect a hero with model good looks, and then they have the audacity to just disappear and unmatch him after messaging him for a while. Like, it was 2 paragraphs. And then he goes on about the quote unquote sheer arrogance of these women, some of whom were pregnant or just had babies, God forbid. And apparently that quote unquote boils his piss. Even though at other times, I mean, he seems to have no problem just hooking up with women and claims he doesn't want any more than casual flings. But then on the other side, he seems to get like super mad when he like flirts with a woman online and then she suddenly stops talking to him. And I was just kind of like, I don't know, it just seemed kind of weird. Then like later in the story, like he's on Tinder again and he thinks of someone as a quote stupid bitch because she stopped talking to him after they exchanged a few flirtatious messages. It all came across a little bit as sort of like very unreasonably angry, very entitled, a little bit misogynistic. I know Jimmy is not a real dude, but if he was, I mean, I would tell him, look, there are lots of reasons why a woman might stop messaging you on Tinder, one of which is that you said something that pissed her off or creeped her out and she was too uncomfortable to call you out on it, so it was just easier to ghost you. You know what I mean? I mean, again, this whole sidebar, like this whole Tinder thing, has really nothing to do with the narrative at all, and therefore it kind of like stuck out like a sore thumb to me. And like Jimmy also makes a supposedly clever joke to his mom about Chinese food being made of cats and dogs, which was already a very tired joke back when my racist grandpa said it back in the 70s. So I thought that was a little weird too. There's also a bit where Jimmy is in Germany and he's in the hotel room and he's watching one of his favorite movies on the TV, which is Trading Places, which is a great movie, by the way. And he laments, again, nothing to do with the story, that, oh, the movie would never be made nowadays because of the woke brigade. And like reading that, seriously, my eyes rolled so far back in my head that I think I saw my frontal cortex, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to say, like, well, all of this stuff is not as blatant or as long running or as tiresome as kind of all the insidious right-wing bullshit that was in that Hidden Pictures book by Jason Rekulak that I reviewed like a while back, which that's kind of like the gold standard. It was a little bit annoying, kind of unnecessary. Like, it kind of read as maybe the author's own sour grapes, or like I said, like maybe inserting his own opinion. I don't know if that's true or not. And it kind of took away from the story because it just like stuck out to me. Now, all that said, I was thinking about it afterward, like when I was kind of writing notes about for the review. Now, some of that stuff might have just been in there just to make Jimmy seem more unlikable so that he could slowly become a better person, like kind of through the trials and tribulations that he endures through the story as he's putting his life on the line to try to rescue his brother, who he never really liked before. You know what I mean? So maybe he's trying to build, maybe the author's trying to like build an arc. So he's kind of making him a little bit of a dick at the beginning so he can kind of get a better, which I get that, like, you know what I mean? If that's the case, I see what he was going for, trying to give Jimmy like a more pronounced arc. I still feel like it could have been better conveyed without all of this weird, random, stupid bitch and Chinese food made of cats and dogs and all that kind of shit. Like, I think it could have been better conveyed because he came, honestly, even without that, he still came across as kind of an arrogant douche a little bit at the beginning. So it's like, and then he was like a better dude at the end, like after all the stuff that he went through. So I don't really think you needed that stuff in there. It just seemed kind of unnecessary. So, but honestly, like, in spite of these bizarre digressions, which, like I said, could honestly just be removed entirely, and it wouldn't make the slightest bit of difference because it doesn't have anything to do with the story. It doesn't serve the story at all. I really did like this book overall, and, you know, quite a bit. Like I said, I think this is my favorite one of all the ones that I've read, even though I like the character, like the private investigator in the other two books, more than I like the main character in this one. But this one, I don't know. I liked the story, like, a lot better. You know, it's a very captivating story. The villains are, you know, really interesting and they're super, super evil. Like, they do some really fucked up shit in this. And the final battle, like where they're fighting the vampire cult or whatever, is actually pretty epic. It's pretty tense, like pretty gory. And there's real stakes and there's, you know, people having to step up. So there's real actual like acts of heroism, like with a lot of the characters. The mysterious man that Jimmy meets at the park is also like a really great character. I liked him a lot. He's very tragic, but he's also kind of inspiring, like all at once. So I'm actually kind of hoping, I'm not like no pressure or anything like that, but I actually kind of hope that the author does more with him, like in a follow-up book, because I'd be interested in reading more of that dude's exploits, like maybe his backstory or something like that. Also, gotta say, any book with like a cool kitty cat who lives through the entire story is always gonna get extra points from me, So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Hope you guys enjoyed the review. If you did, please leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe, all of that stuff. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.